Hello and welcome to World History Encyclopedia. My name is Kelly and today I'm joined with a special guest. I have the author of the book Ariadne, Jennifer Saint. Thanks so much for joining me. Welcome, Jennifer Saint. Thank you so much for joining me today and chatting to me about your brand new book Ariadne, which I have just here. With the two different editions. So this is your debut novel, which is so exciting. Yes, you've got a beautiful background there. I love it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the book and maybe ways that you differed from the original myth?
Yeah, so the book is a retelling of the myth that we're all familiar with from childhood, Theseus and the Minotaur, but it's from the perspective of the woman who made that happen, the woman who saved the hero, Ariadne, and it tells the story of not just what happened with Theseus and the Minotaur, but what led up to that decision, what made her choose to betray her family and her kingdom, and also what happened to her in her life afterwards.
Yeah, I feel like you get a lot more than you might be anticipating. So the book's split up into 4 sections. And I mean, by the end of I think it's the first section, you've already seen the whole Theseus Minotaur happen. So you think, what are you going to get next? So it's awesome that you get the rest of her life as well. Did you differ at all from the myth? So I think there's 2 primary sources that you can draw from for this particular myth. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I went primarily with Ovid's Heroides, in which he, in the 1st century BC, was writing these letters from mythological heroines to the men in their stories. And so I used Ariadne's letter and Phaedra's letter from that. And then Euripides' play Hippolytus for Phaedra's story. So I did depart from the myths quite a bit. I mean, in the Heroides, it doesn't take Ariadne past the sort of episode on Naxos. I'm kind of trying not to give spoilers for people who don't know. So yeah, but that really gave me a grounding in the kind of character that I wanted Ariadne to be. So in the letter, she's incredibly passionate, incredibly angry, and she's just got such a powerful voice that I really wanted to convey. And in the Euripides play Hippolytus, it was really important to me to change Phaedra's story actually quite significantly. In the play, she is very much, I think, more of a kind of passive victim of what happens to her. And she also is kind of notorious in that she makes, in the play and in other versions of her story, makes a false allegation of rape. And that was a story that I really didn't want to tell. I really wanted to tell her story in quite a different way and not perpetuate the idea that false rape allegations are a common thing, because they are absolutely not.
No, they're not. And I really, really liked what you did with her story, actually. I really enjoyed being able to see the thought processes from Phaedra's point of view, because the play is so tragic. It really is so tragic. And you don't really get a lot. And I guess there's a couple of differences where in the play this is brought on by Aphrodite, but in your book you've decided to make it a completely organic experience. Did you already want to do that when you first started writing the book, or is that something that sort of came out of writing Phaedra how you wanted her to be?
Yeah, I mean, Phaedra really developed actually over the writing process. She became a much bigger role in the story than I originally intended her to be, because I realised how important she is and how significant she is. And although it was difficult, because it would fit so well with the themes of what happens to a lot of the other women in the novel, to go with the version in which in the play Phaedra is being punished for Hippolytus's behaviour. He's arrogant, he's insulted Aphrodite, and Aphrodite decides to ruin him by making Phaedra fall in love with him, and that ruins her in the process. And that theme of women being punished for the behaviour of men is obviously, it's so prominent throughout the book. So it would have fitted to keep that. But at the same time, when you're writing a novel of myths, and you're trying to make these characters who are, I think in sort of in traditional stories, they're kind of larger than life, and they don't always behave in a way that seems kind of psychologically convincing. And it feels like more of a cop out in the format of a novel to say a god made them do it. It doesn't ring as true. And it seemed to me so believable that Phaedra would fall in love with Hippolytus, because she's married to Theseus, who is not a very good husband, to state it mildly, and he's much older than her. And there is this terrible double standard, and the way that he treats women is horrendous. And then you have Hippolytus, who completely rejects that lifestyle, who is the opposite of his father in so many ways. So it seemed so obvious to me that when he turned up, that actually Phaedra would organically and naturally be so drawn to him, not necessarily because of who he is, but because of what her life is like.
Definitely. I felt so much for Phaedra, and I felt so bad. And as wrong as it is, he's her stepson. You get it. You fully understand why she would be feeling this way. And I mean, she's lived such a unfortunate life. Nothing that she's done has really been her choice at all. And I really liked that you didn't, because I mean, the book really does emphasize women being punished for men's actions, and how regardless of what they do, what they want, they have no say. And I really liked how you didn't use that for Phaedra, and you had this character who started so courageous and strong, and then she ended up in a situation that she probably never saw herself, but then she ended up doing something. She ended it for herself. I don't know, I felt like a very sad yet empowering ending, which was very conflicting in my heart. I love that you wrote this story, because you're right, I love that this is becoming its own genre in itself, where we're getting all of these books from the female point of view, and you can tell you've done so much research for this book, which is just brilliant. How did you go researching it and compiling all the information? Did you find any parts difficult? Did you have contrasting evidence? And how did you work through that?
So I started with the Oxford Classical Dictionary, which is a massive, massive reference book. And that kind of gave me, that's quite comprehensive in that it gives quite a lot of the versions of what happens to these characters. But some of them do conflict. And so then, like I said, I used the Heroides, I used Euripides, Hippolytus, I went on kind of theoi.com. I looked for vase paintings, classical paintings, anything that kind of showed these characters that I could use to build a profile for them. But yeah, a lot of versions of mythology contradict each other, and sometimes it's easy to pick because there's versions where Ariadne dies really early on in Naxos, so I knew that I wasn't going to use those versions of the myth because it'd be a much shorter book. But then I think particularly deciding on the ending, I've maybe departed from some of the better known versions, because it was just really important to me, I think, when making those decisions of where am I going to depart from the myth and where am I going to kind of introduce something completely of my own or go with a different version. It was really about the story that I wanted to tell and the themes that stood out to me in these women's stories, which really was about women being overlooked and women suffering the consequences of men's behaviour and women's lives being less significant than men's reputations and men's glory. Those were the things that I really wanted to bring out. So when I was choosing what version of the myth am I going to go with, or do I want to take a complete detour, it was what fits this story that I want to tell. Because I don't think there is a value in just, I mean, you can't tell it without adding something of your own, without thinking, what message do I want to convey? Otherwise, what's the point of telling it at all?
It's a super prevalent theme throughout the whole book. And I mean, you start from the very beginning with the mention of Scylla, which I didn't know that Minos treated her like that. And I'm like, oh my God, page 1, and I'm already sad.
Yeah.
I found Ariadne was really self-aware of this, and then I feel like Phaedra, that developed as the book went. But from the very beginning, Ariadne was completely aware of the ways that men used women and how they just didn't have a say. And especially when I think Daedalus said, what is Theseus going to let you take him out in a bag and just, hide him away? And you think, well, he's not going to do that. It's all about the story, and it's all about the name, and that's just not something that women in the ancient world and in myths really get. So I really liked that it was such a prominent theme throughout the whole thing. And sort of on the point of Theseus, your characterization of him was really interesting. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how you sort of developed his character? Because he's not as much of a hero as some of the other Greek heroes in myth.
Yeah, definitely. I listened to a podcast actually, Let's Talk About Myths Baby by Liv Albert, and she talks a lot about Theseus, and she raised a really interesting point about him, which is that unlike other heroes in Greek mythology, he primarily kills other people more than monsters. I mean, he does obviously kill the Minotaur, but a lot of his victims are human, and so already you see how he stands out as a darker character. And a lot of the stories about him, when you just dig a little bit deeper, are really, really shocking and horrendous. But because he is this legendary hero of Athens, there are obviously a lot of stories which glorify him and elevate him and kind of gloss over the more unpleasant aspects of his character and his behaviour. So I wanted to present a more balanced version of him. But I think as well, I was interested in the way that it's not just women who are trapped in this very sort of misogynistic patriarchal narrative. The men are trapped in it as well, in terms of, I was always quite fascinated in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the way that Achilles sacrifices everything for glory and reputation and honour. And then when Odysseus comes to him in the underworld in the Odyssey, he says, oh, none of it was worth it. I would rather be alive, even if I was the lowliest, most unknown person in the world. I'd rather have my life. And I just thought there's such a tragic irony in that, and the way that these heroes just don't recognise the value of the life that they've got because they are so focused on this concept, this really nebulous idea of some kind of immortality through deed and reputation. And there's a sadness in that as well. And it makes them treat other people as disposable and expendable, especially the women. So I thought there were more layers to him. He was not just a hero, and he's not just completely a villain, though his behaviour is definitely more towards that end of the spectrum.
Because I feel like you could have gone just all out horrible. Like, it probably would have been really easy to just make him this deplorable character that we automatically hate. But I found when I was reading it, it was like an undercurrent. It was a very because when you originally say he's got cold green eyes, that's not really the kind of description you would think of as a hero. You'd want him to be warm and open and you know what I mean? So I found that was really interesting. It was more of a calculating evil kind of thing underneath this heroic figure. And I mean, ultimately he ends up alone and sad. I mean, he's pretty much just abandoned a family that he probably could have loved, and he just abandons his kids. So it kind of does make you feel a little bit for him at the end, even though you don't really want to feel for him. It's very
well, he's brought it all on himself. But yeah, I think that he's so focused on getting this glory that actually, when you look at it, isn't really worth very much at all.
No, not at all. And I guess in the whole killing people versus the Minotaur, it sort of brings us to the Minotaur. You had him quite human in a sense that characters like Pasiphae and Ariadne remember that the Minotaur had a name, Asterion, and that he was human, and they were, they tried to raise him as human as possible. What made you sort of want to bring that idea that he was potentially at one point a little bit human versus just an all-out beast?
I suppose I was thinking, really, that's how you would treat him as a mother. If I think you would have so much faith in your children and just so much instinctive, unconditional love for your baby when it's born. And I felt really sorry for the Minotaur as well, because it just isn't his fault. He didn't ask to be born. He didn't have to be a monster, and he's created as a joke, this cruel joke that Poseidon plays on Minos and his family. And I felt that it's not the Minotaur who is the real monster in that story. It's absolutely Poseidon for creating him in the way that he creates him. And I know that there are stories that say that Ariadne had a special relationship with the Minotaur. I think that you would. I think as a mother, as a sister, you would do your best. And this baby is half human, it's half monster, but you would desperately want to try and nurture any scrap of humanity within him that you could find. And I thought the Minotaur story is such a tragedy as well.
No, I agree. And is there any reason why you sort of left Phaedra out of that? So you had her, she didn't want anything to do with this little baby half human. Is there any reason why you didn't have her treat him the same way as Pasiphae and Ariadne?
I think just because she's younger and I think like less able to understand the nuances of that, and just to see him as a monster. This is not a baby, this is not a human, this is something just repulsive and revolting. I think it's not everybody who would be able to look at him and see anything different.
It sort of just struck me that he was a lot more human in the way that other characters mentioned him and thought about him, which I thought was really interesting, because really you only ever hear about him being this monster, and again, it's just not his fault, and it's just another example of how women are forced to deal with the repercussions of men's actions and choices, which is, if he just sacrificed that bull, it wouldn't have ever happened, there would have been no issue.
No, I was just going to say that's what makes Greek tragedy so tragic, isn't it? It's always preventable.
It's so tragic. And I actually found when I was reading your book, it felt a bit like a Greek tragedy, whereas you didn't get a lot of battle scenes or violence or anything like that. You don't see firsthand the Minotaur being killed, but you hear about it later and you hear about it third person, and that really struck me as a Greek theatre idea. And then again with Ariadne and the idea of like catharsis when she was on Naxos and she just like let her rip, she just screamed and yelled. Did you have any of these ideas going into it, or did they sort of just form as you were writing the story?
And I think probably not consciously, but when you put it like that, then actually, that's true. That is in there, and that is probably just from. Yeah, I think that's just come from reading classics and knowing it, that was how the story just seemed to come. That Ariadne's catharsis on Naxos was incredibly satisfying to write. Yeah. It really was.
I loved reading that. I'm just like, yes, tell the universe how you're feeling and get it off your chest. I feel like Ariadne went through so much growth in this book. So much. Did any of it, as you were writing, anything that you write about her surprise you?
Yeah, I think so. That's the thing about writing, is that, I suppose the magic of writing is when your characters do take on a life of their own and they do start to do things that surprise you. That's probably when you think, maybe I'm writing something that's good if my characters are behaving like this. So her anger on Naxos did surprise me a little bit, and I suppose that's because as women, you often don't feel like you can express your anger. You're often socialised to push it down and to direct that anger internally and at yourself. And so it did feel quite different to be writing a woman just screaming out all of that rage. But of course she's able to, because there is nobody else there. And at that point, why not scream at the universe? So, but that felt like a shift in Ariadne's character, when I was thinking, well, she did this brave thing in helping Theseus, but she is going to go on and she's going to be braver, and she's going to get strength from these things that happen to her, and that is going to change who she is throughout until the end, when I think she really shows how far she's come.
I thought it was just the best scene. I don't know, I loved it. I just thought seeing her just unleash these emotions was so wonderful, because I feel like she bottled up so much since, since the Minotaur was born. Suddenly she can yell about how frustrating and how unfair life is, and I loved it. And I just found as they because you kind of get the whole lifespan of both Ariadne and Phaedra. You get from childhood to the day that they die. And they both sort of grew up in really different ways. And were you planning on having them so contrasting as characters? Because I feel like, especially when they both were mothers, and the way that they, the way that they worked with their children and just their feelings was so different, whereas they had a very similar upbringing. How did you work with that?
Yeah, I think that although their upbringing is similar, and I was always so interested in that because their stories are told separately most of the time, even though they're sisters, and they have this shared childhood, the shared experience of the Minotaur, and then of course their fates are interlinked with Theseus in later life, both of them. But even so, I'd never come across any version of their stories that brought them together. So I was really interested to do that and to think about the ways in which they would diverge and they would be different, because their experiences after Crete are so very different. And I think in particular the fact that Phaedra lives out what Ariadne was supposed to, what Ariadne wanted for herself, is actually what Phaedra goes on to do. And it turns out so differently to how either of them could have expected. And I thought that would really create the contrast in their characters. How they survive the lives that they go on to after the Minotaur really shapes them, I think, shapes who they are and their personalities. And their experience of motherhood, where you've got Ariadne on an island populated with women, and you've got Phaedra, a foreigner in a city that's hostile to Crete, where she's from, how different your experience of motherhood is depending on the kind of support that you have around you. And I thought that for Phaedra, being much more isolated, she would feel differently about being a mother. She would have that different relationship with her children, because it was just so much harder for her.
And I guess I think you brought up at one point where she looks at one of her kids and he had like the jawline of Theseus, and I feel like having that reminder that she's locked in this life with a man she doesn't love, she's locked in this marriage, and there's absolutely nothing. So I guess Ariadne has these children that she can look on with love because, she loves Dionysus, and that's, it was what she wanted. And then I guess, with the contrast of Phaedra, it's just a reminder of everything that she didn't get. And I loved having those.
Yeah, exactly.
I loved having the contrast between them, chapter on chapter. I thought it was wonderful, and having their stories together. Because I feel like you forget that they have the same childhood and they are sisters.
I think we don't see them together very much. And Phaedra's story is usually told sort of much later. I don't think that she kind of references the Minotaur and her upbringing a little bit in the play, in the Euripides play. But it's not such a central part of Phaedra's story. But I mean, it would be. Growing up with a monster that eats people would be very significant in your life.
Yeah, and it's almost like, they've had this upbringing where they're just terrified all the time. You mentioned at the start where suddenly they'll hear a roar or the ground will shake, and it's just like a constant reminder that there's this monster right underneath you. There's nothing you can do. There's nowhere you can go. Yeah, they've got to assume that that's going to affect a child somehow.
I think so.
Yeah. Since you've got both books behind you, I actually wanted to ask you about the covers. So we have the US edition, and we have the UK and Australia, and I think that's like the one that's a bit more prevalent in bookstores. They're so different. Mm-hmm. Do you have any say over the covers and maybe why they are quite different?
Yeah, I was surprised actually. I mean, first of all, I was surprised that books do have such different covers, like particularly between the UK and the US. I didn't expect that to be the case, but they really are. And it made me go down a bit of a rabbit hole actually of looking at books that I own and seeing what the covers are like in other countries. But I was surprised that I did get some input into them, and both my publishers on both sides of the Atlantic, they did ask my opinion. They did show me earlier versions and sort of which one do you like better. So I was really pleased with that. But I think although they are so different, they both represent the book so well, which I think is amazing. I mean, I think if I walked into a bookshop and I saw either of those, I would buy that book. I think the covers are, yeah, they jump off the shelves at you. I love the shiny gold, and then I love the way that Ariadne just looks right at you on the American cover. So I couldn't be happier with them.
Yeah, they're amazing. They both have very different focal points. Like the US one is very sort of highlights that she's the granddaughter of Helios, the Titan of the sun, correct? So that's very much like here's this woman of godly birth, and yet she lives this life that was not ideal, I guess. And then you've got the other one, which I guess signifies more her later life, and you've got the snake and you've got the grapes. And so I thought they were both beautiful, but just so different.
Yeah, and I was really pleased as well. But I mean, my say was, oh, I love them. I didn't ask for any changes.
Well, yeah, I just really wanted to ask because when I saw the first one I saw was just Ariadne on her own. I said, oh, I love that. And then I saw the gold one. I'm like, oh my God, same book. I love that too. I need them both. Got to do it. But as your debut novel, I feel like you've got a lot of traction. A lot of people are reading it, and it's such a, like I said before, it's a genre that is booming right now, and there's a lot of different retellings happening. Do you have any more plans to explore other myths or other women in future books?
Yes, I have actually finished drafting my second novel, and that's going through the edits at the moment. And that is it's another mythological retelling from the perspective of women, and I'm starting book 3 as well, because I think there are so many stories to tell, and personally, I can't get enough of them. You know, every time I see that there's another Greek myth retelling coming out, that we're going to focus on some secondary characters, I am really excited, and I'm just like, well, take my money immediately. So I am really happy to be writing more, and I think, I think there is a lot more scope for it.
I'm the same with you. I see one on the shelf and I'm like automatically going to buy it. But that's so exciting. You've got 2 in the works. That is wonderful. So everyone has to now keep their eye out for information popping up. Do you know potentially when we can expect the second one?
Yeah, I think news will be coming out about the second book soon. I don't know exactly when, but yeah, soon.
That's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and for joining World History Encyclopedia. It's been awesome to talk to you about your new book, Ariadne. And if you want to purchase it, you will be able to find links for it down below, as well as all of Jennifer's social media links and stuff like that, so you can find her. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the review that you've written of the book. I'm so appreciative. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Yeah, you can find that review actually on the World History Encyclopedia website, which I will also link down below. This video was brought to you by World History Encyclopedia. For more great articles and interactive content, head to our website via the link below. World History Encyclopedia is a non-profit organisation, so if you'd like to support our work, you can head to our Patreon page via the pop-up in the top corner of the screen or via our Patreon link down below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon with another video.